MrBeast went to film a video in Africa, but what he saw there made him stop everything. The dusty red roads of rural Kenya stretched endlessly under the blazing sun as Jimmy Donaldson, better known as MrBeast, stepped out of a rugged SUV, adjusting his sunglasses against the glare. He had come to Africa with a clear mission: to film one of his signature large-scale charity videos. This time, he planned to build a well in a village struggling with access to clean water. A project he hoped would not only provide immediate relief, but also inspire millions of viewers to contribute to similar causes worldwide. Jimmy's team was already hard at work setting up cameras and equipment near the outskirts of the village, while local guides helped coordinate logistics with community leaders. The air buzzed with anticipation, both from the villagers who had gathered to watch and from Jimmy himself, eager to make a difference. But as Jimmy walked deeper into the village, something caught his eye, a sight that stopped him dead in his tracks. A young girl, no older than 8, stood by a makeshift trough filled with murky brown water. She carefully dipped a cracked plastic jug into the sludge, her small hands trembling as she strained to lift it. Her clothes were tattered, her bare feet caked with dirt, and yet her face carried an expression of determination rather than despair. Jimmy approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's your name?" he asked softly, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "Amara," she replied shyly, clutching the jug tighter to her chest. "Why are you collecting this water, Amara?" Jimmy continued, gesturing toward the trough. "For my family," she explained simply. "We drink it, cook with it, everything." Jimmy felt a lump rise in his throat. He knew intellectually that many communities in Africa lacked access to clean water, but seeing it firsthand through the eyes of a child made the reality hit harder than he'd anticipated. "Doesn't it make you sick?" he asked gently. Amara nodded. "Sometimes. My little brother got very ill last year. He didn't get better." Her words hung heavy in the air, each syllable weighted with loss and resilience. Jimmy reached out instinctively, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Amara smiled faintly, as if sensing his sincerity. "But we still have hope," she said. "My teacher says help will come someday." Jimmy swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile back. Well, maybe today is that day. As he stood up and rejoined his team, Jimmy couldn't shake the image of Amara's face, or the weight of her words. Building a well was important, yes, but suddenly it felt like such a small step in addressing the enormity of the challenges these families faced every single day. Determined to understand more, Jimmy spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the village, speaking with residents, and learning about their daily struggles. What he discovered left him shaken. Women and children walked miles each day to fetch water, often sacrificing time they could spend attending school or working. Crops failed due to droughts exacerbated by climate change, leaving families without food or income. Medical care was virtually non-existent, forcing people to rely on traditional remedies for illnesses caused by contaminated water. By sunset, Jimmy returned to the filming site, his mind racing. His original plan, to dig a single well, now seemed woefully inadequate. Yes, it would help, but it wouldn't solve the root problems. It wouldn't ensure long-term sustainability or address the broader systemic issues plaguing the region. That night, as Jimmy sat alone in his tent, staring at the stars scattered across the African sky, he realized he couldn't go through with the video as planned. Not like this. Because what he had seen wasn't just poverty, it was resilience, strength, hope, and reducing it to a 10-minute YouTube clip felt wrong. He picked up his phone and called Chandler, his business partner. "We need to rethink everything," Jimmy said firmly. "This isn't just about building a well anymore. It's about changing lives, for good." Chandler hesitated on the other end of the line. "Are you sure? We've already invested a lot into this project." "I'm sure," Jimmy interrupted. "If we're going to do this, we're doing it right. No shortcuts, no half measures." Hanging up, Jimmy turned back to the village, visible in the distance under the glow of a crescent moon. He didn't know exactly how he would pull it off, but one thing was certain: stopping wasn't an option. Not when there were still people counting on him. The next morning, Jimmy gathered his team under the shade of a large acacia tree to discuss the new direction of the project. The air was thick with tension as he explained his decision to scrap the original plan, a simple well-digging video, and replace it with something far more ambitious. "We're not just building one well," Jimmy announced, pacing back and forth. "We're creating a sustainable solution that will impact this entire region for years to come." His team exchanged uneasy glances. They had worked tirelessly to prepare for the initial concept, and now they were being asked to pivot entirely. "Jimmy," one of his producers began cautiously, "I get where you're coming from, but this is a massive undertaking. We don't have the resources or time to pull off something like that here. Not without jeopardizing the whole trip." Jimmy stopped pacing and turned to face them, his expression resolute. "I know it's risky," he admitted. "But think about it. What's the point of doing this if we're only scratching the surface? If we leave after digging one well, these families will still struggle tomorrow, next week, next year. That's not good enough." Chandler chimed in via speakerphone, having joined the meeting remotely. "He's right, guys. This isn't just about views or likes. It's about making a real difference. If we can figure out how to scale this properly, we'll set a precedent for future projects." Encouraged by Chandler's support, Jimmy outlined his vision: a comprehensive initiative that would include multiple wells, irrigation systems for farming, solar-powered water purification units, and educational programs to teach hygiene and conservation practices. Additionally, he proposed partnering with local organizations to ensure ongoing maintenance and community involvement. "But how do we fund all of this?" another team member asked skeptically. "Even with donations, it's going to cost way more than our budget allows." Jimmy smiled faintly. "Leave that part to me. I'll cover whatever we need personally if I have to. But first, let's focus on proving that it's possible." With renewed determination, the team got to work revising their plans. Over the next few days, Jimmy immersed himself in the community, consulting with village elders, teachers, and health workers to identify the most pressing needs. He also reached out to NGOs and government agencies operating in the region, seeking partnerships and expertise to bolster their efforts. One afternoon, while visiting a nearby school, Jimmy met Amara again. She was sitting outside with a group of classmates, practicing arithmetic on a chalkboard propped against a tree. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up with recognition. "You came back!" she exclaimed, running over to greet him. "Of course I did," Jimmy replied, kneeling down to her level. "I told you help was coming, didn't I?" Amara nodded eagerly. "Will we really have clean water soon?" "Yes," Jimmy promised. "And maybe even enough to grow food and keep your school running smoothly. How does that sound?" Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "It sounds like a miracle." Inspired by her optimism, Jimmy redoubled his efforts, determined to turn his promise into reality. But as progress began taking shape, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to derail everything. A representative from a regional authority arrived at the village unannounced, demanding to inspect the project. Suspicious of outsiders, the official accused Jimmy and his team of exploiting the community for publicity without proper permits or permissions. "This is illegal activity," the man declared, waving a clipboard dramatically. "You cannot proceed until we verify your intentions." Jimmy felt a surge of frustration but forced himself to remain calm. "We're not here to exploit anyone," he said firmly. "Our goal is to help. Every step we've taken has been done in collaboration with the community leaders. If there's paperwork or approvals needed, we'll handle it. But please don't delay the work. These people need clean water now." The official sneered, clearly unconvinced. "That's not my problem. Rules are rules." For a moment, Jimmy considered arguing further, but then he remembered something crucial. In situations like this, power often lay in relationships. Turning to the village elder standing nearby, he asked quietly, "Is there someone who can vouch for us? Someone who knows why we're here?" The elder nodded and stepped forward, addressing the official in Swahili. Though Jimmy couldn't understand every word, the tone was clear. The community trusted Jimmy and wanted the project to continue. After a tense exchange, the official reluctantly backed down, agreeing to expedite the necessary approvals, though not before warning Jimmy to tread carefully moving forward. As the man drove away in a cloud of dust, Jimmy exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the encounter settle over him. "This is harder than I thought," he admitted to Chandler later that evening during a debrief call. "It always is when you aim big," Chandler replied. "But look at what you've already accomplished. You've rallied the community, secured partnerships, and adapted to challenges on the fly. That's leadership, Jimmy." Jimmy smiled faintly, though his mind remained restless. There was still so much to do, and time was running out. Little did he know, the greatest test was yet to come. Just as Jimmy and his team began implementing the revised plan, a sudden crisis struck the village. A severe drought swept through the region, worsening conditions dramatically. Rivers dried up, crops withered, and tensions rose among the villagers as desperation set in. What had already been a dire situation became catastrophic overnight. Jimmy watched helplessly as women and children trekked even farther than before in search of water, returning with barely enough to sustain their families. Amara, who had become a symbol of hope for Jimmy, now looked gaunt and exhausted, her once bright eyes dulled by fatigue. "This is unbearable," Jimmy muttered to himself one evening, sitting alone outside his tent. "We're working as fast as we can, but it's not enough. People are suffering right now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now." Determined to find a solution, Jimmy reached out to international aid organizations, pleading for emergency supplies to be delivered to the village. He also launched an urgent crowdfunding campaign online, using his platform to raise awareness about the escalating crisis. Within hours, donations poured in from fans around the world, along with messages of support and solidarity. But despite these efforts, Jimmy couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that there was a way to make an immediate impact beyond waiting for shipments or approvals. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a conversation with a local farmer named Kibet. "You know," Kibet said thoughtfully, as they walked together through parched fields, "there's an old borehole near the edge of the village. It hasn't been used in years because the pump broke. But if someone could fix it..." Jimmy's eyes widened. "How long would it take to repair?" Kibet shrugged. "A day, maybe 2, if we have the parts." Without hesitation, Jimmy sprang into action. He dispatched members of his team to nearby towns to source replacement parts, while enlisting Kibet and other villagers to begin repairing the borehole. Working around the clock, they managed to restore functionality just as the first shipment of emergency supplies arrived. When the borehole finally gushed forth clean water, the entire village erupted into cheers. Women danced, children splashed in the stream, and elders offered prayers of gratitude. For the first time in months, there was hope in the air, a tangible sense that things might get better. Amara ran up to Jimmy, her face glowing with joy. "It works," she cried, hugging him tightly. "Thank you. Thank you." Jimmy hugged her back, tears streaming down his face. "This isn't my doing, Amara. It's yours. Your strength inspired all of us to keep going." But the celebration was short-lived. As Jimmy surveyed the scene, he noticed a group of men lingering at the outskirts of the crowd, their expressions grim. Approaching cautiously, he learned that they represented neighboring villages, communities equally affected by the drought, but without access to the newly restored borehole. "We don't mean to cause trouble," one of the men explained, "but our people are dying too. Can you help us as well?" Jimmy felt a pang of guilt. In focusing on this village, he had inadvertently neglected others in equal need. "I promise you," he said firmly, "we won't stop until everyone has what they need." Returning to his team, Jimmy outlined an expanded strategy. Instead of limiting their efforts to one village, they would establish a network of boreholes and purification systems across the region, ensuring equitable access to clean water for all. To fund this ambitious expansion, Jimmy made a bold decision. He announced that he would personally match every dollar raised through the crowdfunding campaign, effectively doubling its impact. The announcement went viral, inspiring an outpouring of generosity from donors worldwide. As resources poured in, Jimmy faced another challenge: logistical coordination. Transporting equipment and materials to remote areas proved difficult, requiring creative problem-solving and collaboration with local leaders. At times, progress felt agonizingly slow, but Jimmy refused to give up. One night, as he reviewed plans under the dim light of a lantern, Chandler called with an update. "Jimmy, you're not going to believe this," Chandler said, his voice tinged with awe. "The campaign has surpassed $10 million, and counting." Jimmy froze, stunned. 10 million? Yes. And it's not just money. People are volunteering, offering expertise, donating supplies. This has turned into something bigger than any of us imagined. Tears welled in Jimmy's eyes as he processed the magnitude of what they had achieved. "It's not about me," he whispered. "It's about them, the people stepping up to make a difference." But the most powerful moment came days later, when Jimmy received an unexpected visitor. A young boy from a neighboring village, clutching a handmade drawing. "For you," the boy said shyly, handing over the picture. It depicted a simple scene, a well surrounded by smiling figures holding hands. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky letters, were the words, "Thank you for helping us." Jimmy stared at the drawing, overwhelmed by emotion. In that moment, he realized something profound. True change wasn't measured in dollars or projects. It was measured in hearts touched, lives transformed, and connections forged. And as he looked out at the horizon, illuminated by the golden glow of sunrise, Jimmy knew this was only the beginning. The culmination of Jimmy's efforts arrived on a crisp morning, weeks after his initial arrival in Kenya. The village and several neighboring communities had been transformed. Boreholes gushed with clean water, solar-powered purification units hummed quietly, and irrigation systems nourished fields that had once been barren. Schools reopened, their classrooms filled with children eager to learn, while health clinics provided much-needed care to families who had gone without for far too long. To celebrate the completion of the project, Jimmy organized a gathering unlike anything the region had ever seen. Hundreds of villagers from across the area came together under a sprawling canopy of trees, their faces beaming with gratitude and pride. Local musicians played traditional songs, dancers performed vibrant routines, and elders shared stories of resilience and hope. At the center of it all stood Jimmy, flanked by Amara, Kibet, and other key figures who had helped bring the vision to life. As he addressed the crowd, his voice carried a mix of humility and determination. "When I first came here," he began, "I thought I was here to give something, to dig a well, film a video, and leave. But instead, you gave me something far greater: perspective. You taught me what true strength looks like, what community means, and what it takes to create lasting change." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. "This isn't my victory. It's yours. Every drop of sweat, every moment of perseverance, every act of kindness contributed to this day. Together, we've proven that no challenge is insurmountable when people come together with purpose." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the valley. But Jimmy wasn't finished yet. Turning to Amara, he knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Remember when you told me your teacher said help would come someday?" he asked softly. Amara nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "Well," Jimmy continued, "your teacher was right. Help did come, but not because of me. It came because of you, because of your courage, your hope, and your belief that things could get better. Never stop believing in that, okay?" Tears streamed down Amara's face as she hugged him tightly. "I won't," she promised. Jimmy then revealed one final surprise: a scholarship fund named after Amara, designed to provide educational opportunities for girls in rural African communities. "Education is the key to unlocking potential," he explained, "and Amara represents everything this fund stands for: resilience, determination, and the power to inspire others." Koki. As the announcement sank in, the crowd cheered again, their voices rising in unison. For many, this was more than just a charitable gesture. It was a symbol of possibility, proof that dreams could become reality even in the face of adversity. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Jimmy took a quiet moment to reflect. Sitting beneath the stars, he scrolled through messages from fans and supporters around the world, each one expressing admiration for what he had accomplished. Yet, despite the accolades, Jimmy felt a deep sense of humility. This journey had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had started out wanting to make a difference, but along the way, he had discovered something even more valuable: the interconnectedness of humanity. Chandler joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You've really outdone yourself this time," Chandler said with a grin. "What's next? Space travel?" Jimmy laughed, shaking his head. "No," he replied. "Not space. Earth. There's still so much work to be done here. So many people who need help. This is just the beginning." In the weeks that followed, Jimmy returned home to Greenville, carrying the lessons he'd learned back to his team. "We've done some incredible things," he told them during a meeting, "but there's still so much more we can achieve. Let's keep pushing boundaries, challenging ourselves, and reminding the world that kindness is the most powerful force we have." His words ignited a renewed sense of purpose within the group, setting the stage for future projects that would continue to push the boundaries of philanthropy. Meanwhile, the impact of Jimmy's work in Africa rippled outward. Villages that had once struggled to survive now thrived, thanks to sustainable infrastructure and ongoing support from local partners. Stories of transformation spread far and wide, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. And as Jimmy sat in his office late one night, scrolling through photos from the trip, he couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes stopping everything, Even abandoning a carefully planned video was exactly what needed to happen. Because sometimes the greatest gifts weren't the ones you gave, but the ones you received. And because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like sitting with a child by a muddy trough, could lead to the biggest changes of all.